All right, welcome. We're going to solve this worksheet. So you got your aggregate expenditure model, which at this point is just the first two. We know there's 4 types of spending: consumer spending, business spending, government spending, net export spending. Right now we're just focusing on consumption. So making it a little bit more explicit, your aggregate expenditure will be just the consumption portion, which is your autonomous consumption, and your total spending, which is based on your MPC and your income. So putting it all together with the information that we have about your MPC and about the consumption, we can plug those in, and autonomous consumption plus your MPC times income plus investment gives us a total aggregate expenditure model with just the C plus I when we combine all the terms of 12 plus 0.7 times Y. And now we graph it. So always adhere to what's going on the axes. We've got total spending on the vertical, total income on the horizontal for your aggregate expenditure model. And then we can plug in our autonomous consumption, that which we would do even if we had no income. And the slope of this bad boy is going to be your MPC, showing us how much your spending changes when your income increases. So total aggregate consumption is that orange line, and then if you add investment, which is just a vertical addition of that extra 5, you've got the C plus I line, and then the Keynesian cross. We'll be putting them together, and there you've got your equilibrium. And then we can also solve this algebraically. So we just set spending equal to income, and Y is the variable for spending, and it's also on the AE side, so we can just basically solve for Y, knowing that in equilibrium, Y or income will always be equal to total spending. So combining everything together, you get the following. And continuing to solve algebraically, subtracting 0.75y from both sides, getting you to 0.25y equals 12. Divide both sides by 0.25, and you get Y equals 48. And I'm going to stick to the technical stuff, and the stuff that's covered in slides, please just check that stuff out. All the slides are posted to Canvas. So the government adds to the economy when it spends, so that's G. We're adding on to the C plus I, now we're adding G. And they also take away to fund that spending, so they take out taxes. So total taxes are T. Now, of course, that affects our consumption function because taxes reduce our income. So the way to think about this is to subtract taxes from your income. So if total taxes that you pay depend on the tax rate times your income, so assuming a flat % tax rate, you've got basically your new net income is a function of your whatever is left over after you pay taxes. So 1 minus the tax rate times your income. And so basically you have a little less income to spend, and that's the result. All right, moving on to the second side, second page. So we're continuing to expand this whole thing. And we've got our aggregate expenditure model and adding in the tax rate, well, subtracting out the tax rate, but adding it to the equation, still our investment is given, and now government is also given. So if the government sees a recession in the economy, remember that we're still thinking that most governments try to stabilize the macroeconomy. So if there's a recession, you are going to see government lean against that recession by increasing its spending and or decreasing taxes so that people have more left in their pockets to spend. And all of this will hopefully increase the aggregate expenditure line vertically as people spend more. And it's called, the direction is called expansionary. We're trying to expand spending. The opposite would be contractionary. But overall, this policy is called fiscal policy because it uses the tools of the government budget. Monetary policy is different, but this is fiscal policy. And the next two questions are fairly complex. Don't expect a lot of test questions from them, but basically, anytime you have leakages from the spending cycle, you're going to get a flatter aggregate expenditure line because basically more is draining out and there's less spent. You can think of it almost as your MPC drops as we have these leakages. All right, moving on. We're going to add in net exports. So the notation, as a reminder, is NX, and NX is X minus M, where M is imports. So just like we did with taxes, how do you figure in sort of this particular leakage? Well, net exports is exports minus imports, and we know that we import more when our income goes up, so you can think of imports really as a function of income, where M is the marginal propensity to import. So if we're 80% likely to, if every extra dollar of income makes us spend 80 cents on imports, then your M would be 0.8. And now your net exports can be noted in that particular way. Exports minus this import function. Putting it all together, you've got your aggregate expenditures now without using specific numbers. The general form would be your consumption function plus investment plus government spending plus your net export function, which now we have specified to be exports minus M times Y. And that's the whole thing. Now we could add numbers to it, and sure enough, we'll get the specific to this particular set of data answer. So tracking it down just so you see where all the numbers go and where they all come from. You've got your autonomous consumption, which was 7, your MPC, which is 0.75. We didn't specify the tax rate, so we'll just leave that there. And we've got investment of 5. We've got government spending of 20. And then we've got exports, and our marginal propensity to import is 0.8, and our exports were 3, so 3 minus 0.8 times Y. And you could combine the whole thing if you want, but this is basically as far as we're going to go with it, as long as you kind of get the idea of how this can be noted. So I just combined some terms, and we'll get something like that. Okay, moving on. So why it's worth checking in on yourself once we get sort of in the weeds of solving these equations or writing these equations. Remember why we care so much about that 45-degree line and why equilibrium is always at the point where total spending is equal to total income. So work out for yourself, find maybe some points on that curve and go, all right, if income is greater than, or production and income is greater than spending, what's going to happen? If spending is greater than income production, what's going to happen? And work through the reasoning for that. Okay, we could solve algebraically, we're not going to. Sorry if that makes you sad. All right, so now we loosen our grip on prices and we're going to allow prices to change. And that's going to get us to our aggregate demand model out of our aggregate expenditure model. So as a reminder, what are the things that shift consumption, investment, net exports? Remember, prices aren't allowed to change yet, or they weren't allowed to change in the aggregate expenditure model. So what are the things that shift the AE line up or down? These things, right? And there's a lot here, but the basic idea is whatever makes consumers and businesses feel less good about spending money, and same with exports. So let's look at some of these things. Let's go, all right, now we're going to let the price level change and what's the effect on total spending. So the first of the two effects that explain the downward slope of the aggregate demand curve are the wealth effect, whereby even if your income is unaffected, if you suddenly feel like your purchasing power of your wealth drops, you're going to spend less. Same thing with the international trade effect or the foreign purchases effect. Foreigners purchase less U.S. goods when U.S. prices rise relative to other prices. So we should expect our exports to fall, and that's going to reduce our total spending, right? Because foreigners are part of our total spending. So they say, no thanks, too pricey for our taste. We'll buy it from somewhere with a lower price level. So putting that together with the aggregate expenditure model, and if prices rose, consumption drops, and you can trace the new equilibriums there. And we notice that as price level rose, our economy, the spending in our total economy shrunk, right? That the size of our economy, the size of GDP will have shrunk. And so that's something to think about, and that's how basically we derive the aggregate demand curve from the aggregate expenditure model, allowing prices to change and then tracking those prices down through and creating a downward sloping aggregate demand curve. All right, so we did all that. Check. Explain why the aggregate demand curve is downward sloping. Here's a summary of basically what we just said: the wealth effect and the foreign purchases or international trade effect. So the wealth effect is as, our price level increases, the purchasing power of that wealth drops, and we basically will spend less. So that's going to be a drop in the C part of the C plus I plus G plus net exports. And the international trade effect, which is basically as our price level rises, relatively speaking, foreigners purchase less, so our exports drop. So the net exports portion of C plus I plus G plus net exports drops. Need to have some more coffee so I can write faster. You've done it. Gold star. And winky face.